Fitzgerald is the next one. He is utterly fearless, utterly candid, a brilliant intellect, and at 44, I ask him, as I hope the City Club will, stay in Chicago and reform this state. I give you Peter Fitzgerald.
Well, Tom, my gosh, you placed me up there with Stephen Douglas, and I'm not sure I merited that, but let me tell you this: thank you so much. And before I go any further, let me also thank you for defending me from time to time in columns that you have in the Chicago Sun-Times. Tom, over the years, knew just when to lift my spirits after I'd get beaten up by a famous other columnist in Chicago, Steve Neal, who used to pound me like clockwork. At uncannily timed, well-timed moments, Tom would cheer me up and help me, and I appreciate all those kind things you've said over the years, and I appreciate what you've done for this club, which you lead. I appreciate what you've done for the Rotary One Club of Chicago. I remember the first time I spoke and met you at that back in maybe the mid-1990s at the Rotary One Club, and for so many other things that you've done for the city of Chicago. Let's give a big round of applause for Tom Brozer. And I see so many old friends in this room, I don't know where to begin. I see my colleague from the State Senate, Steve Rauschenberger, one of the Fab Fives back in Springfield. And Tom McCracken, who has also served in Springfield with me, most recently ran the RTA, did a wonderful job in a tough position. Corrine Wood, the former lieutenant governor, it's great to see you here. Dawn Clark-Netsch, the former state controller, and I remember working with you on the first bill I ever introduced in Springfield. It got me off to a bad start with Governor Edgar. The first bill I introduced in Springfield with Steve Rauschenberger as my co-sponsor was to require the state to use generally accepted accounting principles. And Dawn Clark-Netsch supported that, and then we worked on pension reform too. We required the states to amortize the unfunded liabilities in their pensions. That's why you hear the current governor belly aching about how much the pensions, because they wasn't set aside years ago. But it's great to see you. I saw Jim Nalepa. Jim held one of the first fundraisers for me way back when I was running. A former Marine, Army Ranger. I'm sorry. Oh, I apologize. I apologize. Army Ranger, military man, family man, and a wonderful business. Maureen Murphy, who did an admirable job running the Cook County Republican Organization, and so many others. I could go around the room. I would be remiss if I didn't introduce my oldest brother. And I hope he'd stand up, because Jerry has been there from, he doesn't like this, he's saying that he doesn't like this attention, but he has always helped me. Every time I've asked for help, my oldest brother was there to support me. And if he'd stand up, Jerry Fitzgerald, please stand up for a second. And Jerry is 10 years older than me, but wherever I go in the state, he knows a lot of people because he's very much a people person, and he's out there all the time and goes to a lot of things, and so many people know him. But wherever I go in the state, people ask me, how's your younger brother doing? And if you notice, Jerry has a lot more hair than I do, and I think that helps him. Plus, a little word to the wise for those of you who are interested in politics. After looking at my brothers and how much less they've aged than me over the years, I have concluded that banking is less stressful than politics. So just a little bit of word to the wise on that. And finally, she is no longer my chief of staff. She is now has another job, but She was a one-woman army in my office for 6 years. Many of you know her. Maggie Hickey, if you'd please stand up. Everybody remembers Maggie. It was great to see you, and Maggie is the proud mother of a young boy named Alex, and she's kind enough to come by our office Christmas party tonight. But it's good to see so many friends. Listen, I almost don't know where to start in trying to summarize a 6-year term in office that had so many twists and turns. When I went in, it was, if we go back a little bit, I was elected in 1998. It seems a long time ago now, but my first 38 days in the Senate were spent in the impeachment trial of President Clinton. And it was almost a surrealistic experience going in at that time. Since then, we've had 3 wars. We've had the war in Kosovo, we had the war in Afghanistan, and now the war in Iraq. We've had times of great prosperity in the late 90s, but that ultimately turned into kind of a bubble, and then we had a collapse. We had the corporate scandals, and we've had somewhat of a recession. It wound up being somewhat short, but for a long time, the big news coming out of Washington was all the scandals in corporate accounting, and in fact, I was pleased to play a part in those hearings where we had Ken Lay from Enron. I don't know if you remember, I famously said to Ken Lay that I said, I'd say you were a carnival barker, except that might not be fair to carnival barkers. Well, that got an uproar from the Carnival Barkers Association. There actually is a carnival bar. That's not a joke. They started calling, and my staff can attest, they were mad about that, casting a spring. But anyway, it's been an incredible term in office. Let me just talk about a few of the things. Something very recently, I want to leave plenty of time for questions. I want to talk about aviation, U.S. attorneys, and mutual funds. And I'd like to start with the mutual funds because I've really, in the last 2 years where I've not been running for re-election, I've worked extremely hard on this issue. I chaired 3 or 4 hearings on mutual funds. And I delved into this issue in a way that I could not possibly have done if I had been running for re-election. We had Elliot Spitzer, the Attorney General from New York, testify. We had John Bogle, the founder of Vanguard Mutual Funds, the lowest cost mutual funds, testify. And we've ultimately had some successes in that the SEC, during the course of this past year, has adopted 16 or 17 reforms that I had first recommended in January of last year. And I just want to start by asking how many of you, either directly or indirectly, own a mutual fund account, whether through a 401k or a college savings plan or just an ordinary mutual fund? Almost everybody in the room. This is a very, very big issue. Now, let me ask you, how many of you could tell me what the fees are that you are charged by your mutual fund? Does anybody know? Now, Maggie knows. She works for me. She looked into it. Now, raise your hand. If you know the fees, you should be. Now, you actually looked into the fees you were charged, because they're hard to, you have to get the proxy statement. You have to call him Dr. Economos. Now, they didn't tell you the fees in dollars and cents, did they? Okay, see, you're very perceptive. Yeah, Vanguard's the lowest cost. Well, mutual funds do disclose their fees now in their prospectus, but it's expressed as a percentage of the amount in your account. And they talk in basis points and percentage points, and you'd actually have to get out a calculator to find out how much they took out of your account over your past years. And now, why is this a big deal? Well, it's getting to be a bigger deal because 30 years ago, nobody really invested in mutual funds. In 1980, only $115 billion were invested in mutual funds. Today, $7.5 trillion is invested in mutual funds. And you have 91 million American households now have mutual funds. That's the way American households are saving for their household, college, and retirement savings. Now, it's a big problem if the fees aren't disclosed. And it gets really hard if you have a stock mutual fund, for example, and the market goes up and down every quarter. You can't figure out what fees are being taken out, but they're just debited from your account and you never see it. Well, why do fees matter? Turns out that they matter big time, and in fact, that's the biggest determinant of how well you're going to do in investing over time is what fees you pay. It's the biggest determinant because 88% of stock mutual funds underperform the market. So if you think paying a high fee to get a hotshot money manager is a good idea, think again. Chances are you are woefully mistaken. All mutual funds collectively, they just track the market, less the fees you're charged. So look into the fees. Turns out 1 percentage point of fees can cut your retirement nest egg by 45% over 40 years of investing. So many of us in this room are not at 20-year-olds just starting out with a new 401k in the workforce, but I tell the young kids in my office, you watch those fees over time because it adds up to a big return. Most Americans have enough financial understanding to understand the miracle of compounding returns over time, but they haven't yet come to appreciate the tyranny of those compounding costs. If you're being charged 1% a year, it could be $1,000 a year, say, that's taken out of your account. Next year, you don't get a return on that $1,000. And so those costs compound over time, and small differences that sound diminutive and trifling when they're expressed in basis points or percentage points, those can add up to extraordinary amounts in returns over time. Well, I'm pleased to say the SEC, Securities and Exchange Commission, is going to now require mutual funds to disclose the fees they charge you in dollars and cents. And I think it's going to make the industry much more cost competitive. Right now, on just an ordinary index fund, which requires no active management, an orangutan could manage an index fund. There are ranges from 10 basis points at Vanguard or Fidelity that you could buy to up to 2 full percentage points. 20 times. Some funds charge 20 times as much as another, and consumers are often ignorant of these differences, and they don't look into those fees. So I think the hearings we did in Congress, the testimony Eliot Spitzer gave, they enhanced the political climate for the SEC to actually act on that. I think over time, this could really be helpful for consumers and investors. You also need to look into your 529 college savings plans. That's a whole nother issue. They have fees on top of fees because in addition to fees being charged by the underlying mutual fund and fees being charged by the broker, you have the state governments getting into the act and interposing themselves as additional middlemen, charging yet more fees. So in some cases with 529 college savings plans, you'd be better off foregoing the tax break you get for going into that tax-advantaged account and just be better off going to a low-cost mutual fund provider and opening up a fully taxable account because the fees are so horrendous in those college savings accounts. That's something that I hope future Congresses will address. Now, on to aviation. And I see over there some of my only allies in the battles on aviation over the years. I see members of the Suburban O'Hare Commission. I see Joe Karaganis, their longtime lawyer. I see John Giles, the mayor of Bensonville, and so many others, Terry Bruner and Mr. Johnson from Bensonville. It's great of you to be here. Let me give you a thumbnail sketch of where we are on O'Hare, the South Suburban Airport, and why this is such a big issue. Aviation brings economic development like nothing else does to a community. And I have taken around to the editorial boards pictures that I have in my office of Washington of Loudoun County, Virginia, where Dulles Airport is. When Dulles Airport was built in 1960, there was absolutely nothing out there. It was just cornfields north of the city of Washington, D.C. And everybody ridiculed this. They said it's way too far out. No one's ever going to go there. It was a white elephant after it was built. Some newspaper columnist famously said you could shoot a cannon from one end of the terminal to the other and not hit anything. There was nobody there. For a long time, it took Dulles Airport a long time to get going. Today, it's the 5th largest airport in the country, and it's one of 3 airports operating in the Washington area. They have Washington Reagan National, Dulles Airport, and then Baltimore Washington National Airport. So they have 3 hub airports in the Washington community. But today, there are 120 Fortune 1000 companies that have offices in Loudoun County, Virginia, right around Dulles Airport. And it has been, Northern Virginia now is a place, it's kind of a mini Silicon Valley with American Online was founded out there, Nextel, a whole bunch of high-tech companies. It has brought enormous economic development to that region. I see the south suburbs as potentially a future area like Northern Virginia. And I think that the South Suburban Airport, in addition to being much needed additional aviation capacity, will bring more economic development to a part of our state that really needs it. Now, this battle, as anybody who's followed my years in the Senate, this has been the toughest battle for me, or one of the toughest battles, because I was battling Mayor Daley on this issue, and I was battling the newspapers. And at one time, nobody was really for expanding O'Hare Airport. In fact, the last time Mayor Daley raised the issue, the Chicago Tribune editorial page slapped him down pretty hard. But that was about 10 years ago. And over time, Mayor Daley made a concerted attempt to change the opinions in the business community and work on the editorial pages so that they would come out and strongly support tearing up and rebuilding O'Hare. And that was something that I did not think was cost effective. And in fact, I had pledged in my campaign. I was standing next to George Ryan. And Corinne, you weren't on the ticket yet at that time, but George Ryan and I, we stood next to each other at the Suburban O'Hare Commission. And we both said we supported building the 3rd airport and would do everything to advance the 3rd airport, and we weren't for expanding O'Hare. And you know, back in that context, that was back in 1998, I almost lost the endorsement of the Suburban O'Hare Commission to Carol Moseley Braun, because in October of 1998, she blocked an expansion of the number of flights at O'Hare. And this shows how far the political climate changed, where you used to have Carol Moseley Braun and Durbin both opposed to the expansion of O'Hare. Pretty much everybody was opposed to the expansion of O'Hare and for the South Suburban Airport except Mayor Daley. But Mayor Daley worked very hard to change that climate, and he really created a lot of momentum for expanding O'Hare Airport. He introduced a bill via Senator Durbin in the Senate which would have dictated to the FAA that the FAA had to approve Mayor Daley's application to expand O'Hare. And I could never really get that message out, but that bill, whether you're for expanding O'Hare or not, that's not an appropriate piece of legislation for Congress to dictate to the expert Federal Aviation Administration that you must approve Mayor Daley's application to expand O'Hare upon receipt of Mayor Daley's application. He was trying to grease the skids. The other thing that bill did was it gave Mayor Daley condemnation authority over the suburbs who are represented here today. Mayor Daley would have had condemnation authority from the federal government to condemn an unlimited amount of the suburbs. In fact, I tried an amendment that would have limited the geography that Mayor Daley could have taken. They shot that down. And I thought this was outrageous. You're giving condemnation powers to the mayor of one city over people in another city that he doesn't represent, and they're helpless against that. They can't vote for him or against him in a city election, and he can condemn them. That's outrageous. So that was the bill that Senator Durbin had, and I stopped that in the Senate, and I think it was the right thing to do. Where are we today? Where are we today on that issue? Well, Mayor Daley had to go through the ordinary process that everyone else who wants to expand an airport has to go through. He had to put an application into the FAA and let them study it, let them see if it passed the cost-benefit analysis. Mayor Daley's total cost for that project will be $6 billion for runways, $4 billion for terminals, and about another $3 billion in roadway improvements. It gets up to close to $15 billion total. My sense is, my own belief is, that's a waste of money because it only adds 125,000 new operations a year. The mayor's own filings now with the FAA show that he only brings the airport up from a current capacity of 975,000 flights to 1.1 million with after tearing up and rebuilding O'Hare. That's just not a very cost-effective expenditure. In contrast, building the South Suburban Airport, the highest estimates for the full boat South Suburban Airport have been $5 billion. I think it can actually be done for much less if a private developer builds it, as is now proposed. It would bring 1.6 million operations, and it would be done much more quickly, much less expensively, and it would bring some more opportunities to a part of the state that needs those opportunities. I respect Mayor Daley. As mayor of the city of Chicago, I don't blame him for trying to keep all the jobs and economic development within his political jurisdiction, but I felt as senator I had to represent the whole state, not just the city of Chicago, and there are other parts of the state that are entitled to some jobs and economic development too. So that's where we leave that position. Now, finally, and I want to make sure I leave plenty of time for questions. So I will only give you a very brief thumbnail on the U.S. Attorney situation. One of the things that motivated me in going outside the state to pick the U.S. Attorney for the Northern District of Illinois is some of the historical readings I've done. And one of my favorite books is a history of the Chicago Tribune and of its longtime publisher, Colonel McCormick, The Life and Legend of Robert McCormick. It was written by Richard Norton Smith, who's the new library director at the Lincoln Library in Springfield. It's an excellent book. In that book, he has a detailed description of the corruption in Chicago in the 1920s. When Al Capone was so powerful, and when we had a corrupt mayor named Big Bill Thompson, who unfortunately was a Republican. Well, back in the early 1920s, Big Bill Thompson was just running amok in Chicago. There was corruption everywhere. In 1924, Colonel McCormick just sent the Tribune editorial page on a jihad to get rid of Big Bill Thompson. And in the 1924 elections, they got rid of Big Bill Thompson, and a reform mayor got elected. And the reform mayor kicked Al Capone, who, with all apologies to Maureen Murphy, Al Capone literally ran the Cook County Republican Central Committee in those days. And Colonel McCormick described the Cook County, and he was very Republican. Colonel McCormick and the Tribune was having their origins in supporting Abraham Lincoln. But he described the Cook County Republican Central Committee as a criminal enterprise to President Herbert Hoover at the time. But Colonel McCormick supported this reform mayor. The reform mayor kicked Al Capone out of Chicago. He had been in the Lexington Hotel, and he went out to Cicero and set up shop in Cicero. Then the Tribune went to sleep after getting this reform mayor elected, and Big Bill Thompson got reelected in 1928, and he moved Al Capone back downtown to the Lexington Hotel where he was running everything. And Al Capone at that time was estimated to be earning $100 million a year in the late 20s. And he was estimated to be paying $30 million a year of it out in protection. He had everybody on the payroll, cops. He had prosecutors, the local Cook County State's Attorney, a Republican named Crow was on his payroll, and nobody would challenge him. He got great press. In fact, it later turned out that 2 editors at the Chicago Tribune were on the mob's payroll, the city editor and the day editor, if you can believe that. So Chicago was totally in the grip of crime at this time, and Colonel McCormick, in exasperation, he couldn't turn to any local prosecutors. Everybody was bought off by Capone. The street crime was, they had the St. Valentine's Day massacre. It was just horrible, dangerous, thievery, prostitution, narcotics, everything going on. He called on the President of the United States and asked him to put Treasury Department agents from Washington on Al Capone. He said they had to send in people who were from out of town, who weren't beholden. He needed to send untouchables into Chicago. Well, reading that inspired me when when it turned to me, when President Bush got elected, and it turned to me to appoint or recommend U.S. attorneys for the Northern District and Central and Southern Districts of Illinois. And it was that inspiration that I said, you know what, I'm going to do a nationwide search and try and bring in the best prosecutor I can. I called Louis Freeh, who was the director of the FBI, and I said, who's the best assistant U.S. attorney in the country? And he said, Patrick Fitzgerald in the Southern District of New York. And that is the story. Eventually, we got Patrick to apply, and I'm very happy with the way that's gone, because I don't lay awake at night wondering whether anybody's trying to influence my U.S. attorney. So I leave it to my fellow citizens like you and those who are in the media. It's up to you, now that I'm gone, to make sure we continue to have somebody, if not Patrick Fitzgerald, and I certainly hope he stays, but independent, incorruptible, untouchable U.S. attorneys. But with that, let me take some questions. Tom, do I have time for some questions?
Sure. You're still a senator.
Yeah.
Still am, still am.
Okay, you want to go up there to the microphone?
We have a microphone set up in the middle, and if everybody would just tell us your name and where you're from, so that everybody else in the audience knows who you are.
Hi, I'm Jim McAdams. We're from Bartlett. Just like to say thanks for your 6 years. Appreciate it. Happy to be a supporter. Proud to know you, and hopefully we'll go in the future. During the debate, Barack Obama did mention that he did appreciate what Fitzgerald was doing. Patrick, and I think he was glad to see him, and hopefully he'll continue to support him after you're gone. I don't know if that can change or not. But he publicly admitted that he thought Pat Fitzgerald did a good job.
Well, that's good. I did hear Barack Obama say that, and Durbin has said similar things, but what you have to remember is President Bush will turn to a fellow Republican for the recommendation, and with there being no Republican U.S. Senator from Illinois, he will turn to Speaker Hastert. And so it will be up to Speaker Hastert. He has said, I believe, to some that he likes Patrick Fitzgerald, and I hope that he recommends Patrick stay. But other things could happen. We have to have President Bush go along with the recommendation, and then you have to have the U.S. Senators approve of it, because they'll ultimately have to sign something called a blue slip, so that that person can get a hearing before the Senate Judiciary. If they were try to slip somebody in that Barack Obama and Dick Durbin did not approve of, they could refuse to sign a blue slip, and the person would never get a hearing. So the senators still have a role, but they won't be making the recommendation to the president. Maureen.
I too, Senator Maureen Murphy, want to thank you for your stewardship. I'm going to get to a question, but I do want to implore you to do whatever you can for the Illinois Republican Party. I am on the State Central Committee. I know too well that there are cycles in partisan politics, and it is not in the best health of taxpayers to have a one-party state. That being said, I hope you'll keep the door open for Illinois. We did win a Supreme Court seat that was very important in downstate Illinois. You, Senator, and I served with our current governor, Rod, when we got in the General Assembly. The economic climate in Illinois is far worse than the nation. And I wonder, with this economic development engine of the South Suburban Airport, what is it we need to do? What is us, since you will not be there in Washington, in Illinois, what needs to be done to inspire, what would you say, civil disobedience if necessary, to get economic development, to stop the train in Springfield where they may want to start taxing pensions, increasing the income tax, employing a service tax, and continuing down the path of turning our business climate south or east to go to Indiana? Is there anything that we can do now that we're in the minority?
Well, it's going to be hard for Republicans, but there are a lot of things we could do. Illinois has a lot more abusive lawsuits than most other states. We could use some reform of our legal systems in Illinois. That would help. I was down in Southern Illinois about 2 years ago, and I had a meeting of 20 Southern Illinois mayors, and they were disappointed that Toyota had decided to build their Toyota Tundra plant across the Ohio River in Vincennes, Indiana, after looking at Southern Illinois for a very long time. And they were very interested in Southern Illinois, loved the transportation, the interstates were all right there. And I said, did you ask Toyota what the problem was? And they said, oh yeah, our workers' comp premiums were too high and our unemployment insurance premiums were too high. And so they went across the river. And so we have to watch the business climate, and I hope Governor Blagojevich is mindful of that. With respect to Republicans, look, the last two Republicans who've run statewide have both gotten 19% of the vote in the city of Chicago. That's Jim Ryan and George W. Bush. The problem that Illinois Republicans have is that Chicago is overwhelmingly Democrat. I don't think it matters. Some people think it's a big deal whether you have a pro-life or a pro-choice. I happen to be pro-life. But I can pretty much tell you it's not going to matter. Neither one of them is going to get much more than 19, 20% of the vote in the city of Chicago. And that's the fundamental problem. Chicago is a big part of Illinois. The whole rest of the state's Republican. We picked up seats downstate. We won the state Supreme Court seat down there. We need, somehow, we're going to have to do better in the minority communities in the city of Chicago. We've got to get a better share of the emerging Hispanic vote, and we have to do much better with the African American vote. You know, 100 years ago, the African American vote, you know, Illinois and nationwide was very strongly Republican. And in fact, the machine in Chicago was Republican until the early 1930s, when they first, the African American vote started to vote Democratic under FDR. And that's the last time a Republican has won an open seat for the U.S. Senate, was in 1928 when Otis Glenn won. This is the last time. So we've got to do better amongst the inner city minority community. But thank you, Maureen, and thank you for your service. Thank you. You're wonderful. Thank you.
Senator, a couple of weeks ago, I saw your picture in the paper. I'm Ferguson, and I'm from River Forest. Saw your picture in the paper. You were holding a hearing with Elliot Spitzer on the insurance industry. What can you tell us about that?
Oh, yes. Do we have any insurance brokers here? We have a couple. John Rauschenberger, where are you? That's all right. Don't raise, don't. Very interesting. I did a hearing on the insurance brokerage industry. You may have read about Elliot Spitzer's investigation of Marcia McLennan and Aon. It turns out that Marcia McLennan it's a broker for large companies. It would find them insurance, but then it would get a kickback from the underlying carrier for steering their client to the carrier. It turns out, I was quite surprised in holding the hearing, it turns out that most ordinary insurance brokers, how many of you have homeowners policies? I bet everybody in the room. How many of you have auto policies? Okay. Now, if you go to a captive agent for, say, Allstate or State Farm, you know they're going to give you Allstate or State Farm insurance. They're agents. It's explicit that they're working for State Farm or for Allstate. But if you go to somebody who terms themselves an independent broker, you assume they're going to go to try and find the best homeowners deal for you or the best auto. Turns out that the insurance carriers give these people incentives to funnel more of their business into that particular carrier. It may be just a trip to the Hawaii at the end of the year if they sell enough policies, but there's a lot of conflicts. And I don't think it's a problem at the retail level for individuals because there's so much competition against insurance brokers. It is a problem at the Marcia McLennan Aon level because those two companies, Marcia McLennan, have 70% of the market for Fortune 1000 companies. If you're a large multinational corporation and you have operations you need to insure against all over the world, there's only two people really you can go to, maybe three, maybe four. Marcia McLennan, Aon, Gallagher and Willis. That's it. Nobody else is big enough to handle your needs. And they have so much market share that they're able to, they shake down the insurance companies and they work over the clients. I was very concerned about it. I think ultimately there has to be some antitrust jurisdiction for the federal government over those large insurance brokerages. I think they should be made smaller so they don't have such concentrated market power. Consumers should just be aware when you go to your insurance agent, ask them a lot of questions. Are you steering me into Fireman's Fund because that's the best deal for me, or are you getting a free trip to Hawaii at the end of the year if you put another customer into Fireman's Fund? So be educated consumers. Thank you. Yes.
My name is Mike Retzlowski. I'm a City Club member of the Lord of my own practice. And my question, I guess I'm fascinated by, is very few people give up a position of power and authority voluntarily like you have. Or at least on the surface that you have. First of all, why did you give up being a senator? And two, what does the future hold for you?
Well, I suppose that is true. There are others who are retiring after one term, Zell Miller from Georgia, and there's some others retiring after a couple terms right this year, in fact. But I love being senator. It was a wonderful opportunity. I've loved every minute of it. I've loved the people. I've loved Illinois. I love my constituents. I love doing those hearings on those issues. But there is a downside to it that most people don't see, and that's mainly what it does to your family. I came into the Senate at 38. I was the youngest member of the Senate. I had a young son who was maybe 6 at the time, and I didn't realize that I just wouldn't see him much anymore after that. The Senate's in 5 days a week. Unlike the House is only in on Wednesdays. You're not allowed to offer amendments in the House, and so nothing unplanned really happens there. And they're only gone from their districts 2 days a week. But the Senate, unlimited debate, unlimited amendments, you're in 5 days a week. That gives you Saturdays and Sundays as your only days to travel the state. And so every Saturday and Sunday I'm traveling, I'm spending my typical weekend in a Days Inn somewhere in southern Illinois away from my family. That gets real hard. And people don't see that. And I just thought, you know what, I went through in the winter of 2003, there were 11 weekends in a row I didn't see my wife or my son. And I missed all of my son's basketball games that winter. And as the Little League season was starting up, I said, you know what, life's too short. And so maybe I'll make a reappearance in elective office after Jake is off to college, but I really felt it wasn't the right thing for my family, and I think also for the country. I couldn't have delved into like the mutual fund issue the way I have the last 2 years had I been, you know, doing all those fundraisers for re-election. So there is a downside that people don't see. That would be pretty much the answer. There's also a downside you sometimes do see when public officials have great difficulties or they're caught up in some controversy. Yes.
Senator Chris Roebling.
Good to see you.
I think I speak for many people in the room by noting that your departure is a loss for the state, for the Senate itself, and indeed for the country. And I wonder if you could be more specific about any possible role that you could play in coming years here in Illinois, because our party lacks visionary leadership. And you've provided that along with a needed dose of integrity. So might you relocate back home to Illinois, and might you find a role in our public affairs, even if not as an elected official?
Well, I intend to be active, and I still own my home in Inverness. I still have an office in Palatine, and I will continue to maintain that. I do rent a townhome in Virginia, and my son still is finishing up the 7th grade there. We're not going to take him out of school in the middle of the year, but I intend to stay involved. And one way I can stay involved is supporting some good people for posts like governor. And I see my friend Steve Rauschenberger sitting right there. I've been talking to Steve, urging him to consider running for governor in 2006. There's some other friends that I have, very good friends, who may also want to run. My hope would be that conservative Republicans could get together behind one person. And believe me, I am no more talented, I'm probably less talented than this man sitting in front of me, and once he rises to the position of governor or something, everybody will see that. So there's no dearth of talent out there. We've just got to all help it rise to the surface. And so I hope to be involved by supporting good candidates, Chris. Thank you. Yes?
Senator Fitzgerald, my name is Frank Penn. I'm associated with Tom Rogers.
You want to hold that again? I will.
Yeah, he's his phone. My question is, I'd like to thank you again for the gift you've given the state of Illinois that keeps on giving Patrick Fitzgerald. And my question to you is, I believe that the death and destruction going on in Iraq and the heroic sacrifice of our fighting men and women was largely necessitated by the obstructionism of corrupt officials in the United Nations and corrupt governments on the Security Council that wanted to keep Saddam Hussein rice bowl going so they could keep the oil for food program given to them. My question to you is, should the investigations bear out this thesis, what do you think should be done in regard to the United Nations and to the United States attitude toward the United Nations for such cases in the future?
Yeah. You bring up a wonderful point. I don't know how many of you have followed the news that came out of Senator Norm Coleman from Minnesota did some hearings in the Senate on the corruption in that Iraq oil for food program. And it turned out, remember how Russia and France were trying to block us in the UN from getting their support for going into Iraq? Well, it turns out that the French and Russian contractors were all engaged in horribly corrupt acts, skimming money, helping Saddam skim money out of that oil for food program. It's a big scandal within the UN. It's happened under Kofi Annan's watch. Just a couple days ago, Senator Norm Coleman called upon Kofi Annan to resign. He also has other corruption scandals or potential corruption scandals. It turns out his son was getting some contractual payments from somewhere, and as bad as our country is, and we have plenty of corruption at all levels here, we're probably cleaner than the whole rest of the world. And so much of France's foreign policy seems to have been dictated by its corporate interests over in Iraq, and that's only now coming out. I don't know what that means for the future of the UN. They've got kind of have to clean up their act, and we have to fight against the UN ever just becoming a dumping ground for diplomats to stay on some kind of government payroll and just use it for self-aggrandizement as opposed to doing what's right for their country and the world. Thank you. How much more time do we have, Tom? I don't want to.
You have about 6 minutes.
6 minutes. Okay, keep going.
Jameson campaign.
Oh, welcome. Great to see you. Jameson, I hope you start another newspaper in Chicago. Are you going to do?
For some capital.
All right.
They make a great team. I heard there was a comment by Jim Glassman a couple of days ago, which struck me as alarming, that given your watchdog work at SEC, do you know what they're planning to do with respect to the new rules on the NASDAQ and New York Stock Exchange, trading rules, and you've got basically a fairly clean market at NASDAQ, you've got a fairly corrupt market at the New York Stock Exchange in terms of the way trades are handled, and apparently they're getting ready to force NASDAQ into the New York Stock Exchange.
I don't think so. I'd have to read more carefully what you're referring to, but there's some real problems at the New York Stock Exchange. If you go trade on the New York Stock Exchange, it doesn't go through electronically. The New York Stock Exchange will have a specialist who can buy your stock and then resell it. And you have to go through a specialist. If you're trading IBM, you have to go to an IBM specialist. And he can buy your stock and then resell it at a higher price. They have a very Byzantine system that the New York Stock Exchange has resisted changing. Bill Donaldson, the chairman of the SEC, is a former president of the New York Stock Exchange. He knows all the little tricks there, and he's trying to squeeze them out of the system, and he's trying to make sure that the brokers are forced to give customers the best trading price wherever it appears. And it may be that a price is available on a different exchange than the New York Stock Exchange, and the broker would have to give you that better price. And I think he's trying to go in the right direction. I'm not sure in what ways he was, the article you saw suggested he was trying to make the NASDAQ more like the New York Stock Exchange. I wouldn't think that is the case. But thank you. Yes, Jeffrey.
Jeff Berkowitz, host and producer of Public Affairs airing every Monday night at 8:30, cable channel 21 throughout the state of Chicago. State Senator Dan Rutherford running for statewide office for something in March of 2006 in the Republican primary. This Monday night's guest. Senator Fitzgerald.
Be sure to watch.
Be sure to watch. Sean Cass, writing in a Chicago Tribune article on November 4th, a few days after the election, said that George Ryan and his cronies helped drive you out of office for you having the gall to bring outside independent federal prosecutors to Illinois. So I wonder if you could comment on that. But secondly, and very related, John Cass speaking on a conversation with Walter Jacobson and Jack Kennedy on the Sunday morning show that just started on local Fox station, Perspectives. They implied, that is Cass implied, and it appeared that Kennedy seemed to go along with this, that the reason why Patrick Fitzgerald is the U.S. Attorney for the Northern District of Illinois is that it was payback from President Bush for being annoyed with Billy Daley, of course brother of Mayor Daley, trying to drag, as he put it, as Cass put it, trying to drag Al Gore across the finish line in 2000, even when Al Gore didn't seem to want to go there. Given what you just said before about Speaker Hastert and his role in a reappointment, the rumor was at that time you were fighting very hard to make sure that Patrick Fitzgerald stayed there and that Speaker Hastert was opposing you. Can you comment on that? How did how did Patrick Fitzgerald get here, and did George Ryan and his cronies help drive you out?
Ooh, there are a lot of questions there. There was a lot of opposition from local politicians to Patrick Fitzgerald, and they didn't go through me. They went straight to the White House, and it was made very clear to me by the White House that they were getting a lot of flack from local politicians, and I don't want to go any farther than that. But a lot of attempts were made to try to get President Bush not to go along with my recommendation on Patrick Fitzgerald, but the bottom line is the president ultimately did the right thing. Patrick Fitzgerald was not paid for the 2000 elections. That was my pick, and in fact, I think President Bush has he likes Mayor Daley on a personal level. And he even had that appearance at some restaurant with Bill Daley and Mayor Daley not all that long after the election. President Bush isn't a vindictive character like that. Would I run for re-election? There's no doubt there would have been the remnants of the George Ryan crowd that are still around that would have been opposing me, both in any kind of primary and even in the general election. But you know what? I went through that back in 1998. When I announced, George Ryan worked his tail off to recruit somebody to run against me. He ultimately found Lolita Didrikson, and he did everything he could to keep me from getting that office. And I thought at the time was because they wanted somebody they might be able to control. It's the one thing they cared about the U.S. senators for. There's no contracts or patronage, but they knew about the U.S. attorney appointments. And so George Ryan worked very hard against me. I even heard in the general election that there were Carol Moseley Braun, George Ryan bumper stickers that were floating around the city of Chicago. So they were never for me, and I would not have expected to have their support or that crowd support in any re-election campaign anyway. So, but thank you very much for that. Yeah.
Thank you, Senator.
Thanks.
Okay, the last question, Jim?
Hi, Jim Lee. I know you have your own senator. I just want to say you've proven conventional wisdom wrong many times. There's a lot of us who are involved in politics now who weren't until you ran. And I'd just like to say thank you very much for everything you've done. And I think that you deserve a big hand, and you brought a lot of us out, and you changed this party. And I'd like to thank you.
Hey, well, thank you, Jim. You're kind. Thank you very much.